Thousands of US troops arrive in the Middle East as the Iran war enters a fifth week, as President Trump says the US could seize Iran's key oil terminal on Kharg Island. Oil surges to $115 a barrel after the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels joined the conflict, threatening to further disrupt energy markets. The Israeli military strikes targets across Tehran as Iranian drone and missile attacks are reported across the Gulf.
President Trump says he could take the oil in Iran and seize the country's major fuel hub of Kharg Island.
The impact of the Iran war continues to be felt. Diesel prices rise to their highest level since the end of 2022.
Mixed messages from President Trump as he says the US is in serious discussions with new and more reasonable Iranian regime figures over a peace deal. Oil prices skyrocket and Asian markets slide as the economic impact of the war continues to be felt around the world. Now, France's foreign minister has requested an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council following the extremely serious incident, as he put it, targeting UN peacekeepers in Lebanon that killed one Indonesian national. The IDF have expanded operations in southern Lebanon, where UNIFIL is stationed, and they have also continued strikes in Beirut on targets linked to the Iranian-backed group Hezbollah. Over 1 million people have now been displaced inside the country. The Israeli Prime Minister is hoping that the IDF can expand a buffer zone on Israel's northern border. The United Nations says 2 peacekeepers were targeted in southern Lebanon. One was injured, one was killed in the explosion that destroyed their vehicle.
The price of diesel in the UK has reached its most expensive level since the end of 2022 as the Iran oil crisis escalates. The RAC said the average price of a litre of the fuel at UK forecourts today was more than £1.80. Today, business leaders from the worlds of energy, shipping and banking met the Prime Minister in Downing Street to discuss the impact of the Iran war on the UK. Our business editor, Simon Jack, reports.
This Israeli refinery is the latest target of tit-for-tat missile strikes, damaging Middle East energy infrastructure. With US threats to seize Iran's giant Kharg Island oil depot, another possible escalation in a conflict whose economic impact is being felt around the world. Asia, with its high dependence on Gulf oil deliveries, is hardest hit. Shortages in India, rationing in Sri Lanka, and protests in the Philippines. Here in the UK, very little of our physical oil supply comes from the Gulf. But markets are global, and shortages anywhere mean price rises everywhere. And this coach firm has seen its diesel bill rise by £9,000 a week.
It is traumatic, really, because you can't double the price within 6 weeks. As you know, everybody is suffering with it, and we are the one main thing in this business is diesel and, of course, fuel.
Now, both petrol and diesel prices have risen sharply since the conflict began. But, as you can see, diesel has risen twice as fast and is considered more vulnerable to tightening supplies. Now, that is partly because the UK imports most of its diesel from abroad. Just 40% of it is refined here, 22% comes from the Netherlands and Belgium. You get an extra 21% coming across the Atlantic from the US and just 5% coming directly from the Gulf. But these refineries here in Belgium and the Netherlands do get crude from the Gulf, and the tankers delivering there now set sail from the Gulf a month ago before the conflict started. So gaps will start showing up from now, increasing the price pressures. Fuel retailers are urging the government to follow others and cut taxes on fuel.
We've now seen a couple of countries, notably ERA and Australia, actually cut fuel duty. So that's something I'll be requesting of the Chancellor.
This afternoon, the Prime Minister brought business leaders and military advisers together to discuss the conflict and how best to help households and the economy.
It's not our war, but it is our duty to protect British citizens. Particularly, their concern will be not just the escalation of the war, but this sense that it's going to hit them and their families and their households.
Oil prices are very pervasive. They get into farmers' fuel, feed, fertiliser costs, pushing up food prices. Very little escapes the repercussion of a Middle East energy crisis. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Joe Pike at Westminster. And the longer this goes on, the bigger the impact is going to be on people across the UK. How hard is it going to be for the government to react?
It is a riddle, a puzzle, a conundrum, Sophie, which is changing day by day, which the UK government has almost no influence over, and therefore settling on a solution is very difficult indeed. I think we saw with that meeting Keir Starmer had today with business leaders the difficult balance he is trying to strike between a message of reassurance, trying to show that he is taking both this crisis and the economic impact of the war seriously, but also trying not to panic people about potentially a shortage of fuel. Contingency plans we know are in place if that were to happen. We know that discussions are well underway about possible economic support for people and their energy bills. Nothing in place, but the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has made it very clear if there is support, it will be targeted to, quote, those who need it most. The real hope within government remains that all of this is sorted pretty quickly. But from my conversations, Sophie, with people in Whitehall, there is real scepticism about some of the messages we've heard from people in Washington, D.C., including the US Secretary of State, that all of this could be finished in a fortnight.
Joe, thank you. President Trump says that the US is in serious discussion with what he calls a new, more reasonable regime in Iran. But he's also threatened Iran that unless the Strait of Hormuz is opened, the US would obliterate their electric plants, oil wells and Haag Island. The latter is the critical oil facility off Iran's coast, and US officials claim troops are preparing for possible ground operations. Thousands of US Marines are now in the region with special forces and paratroopers on the way. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner looks at what options are available to America.
Paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne, US Marines offshore. Plans afoot for boots on the ground. US forces are gathering near the Gulf as President Trump attempts to pressure Iran into a deal. Great progress, he said, has been made, but if a deal is not shortly reached and if the Hormuz Strait is not open for business immediately, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran, he says, by blowing up and obliterating all of their electric plants, oil wells and Haag Island. Iran currently controls the vital Strait of Hormuz, but its island of Haag could be in America's sights for an invasion. It lies nearly 20 miles offshore. It measures just 8 square miles with 20,000 inhabitants. It's through Haag that 90% of Iran's oil is exported. But Iran has other Gulf islands that could also be targets for US landings, like Larak or Keshem, Abu Musa, and the Greater and Lesser Tombs. Iran has promised to meet any invasion with raining fire down on US troops. 1 month into this war, it still retains enough drones and missiles like these to mean it.
When you start sending ground forces close to the Iranian coast or to Iranian territory, the risk of casualties increases, the danger increases. But at a stage in the war where the US has to be more prepared to accept at least some casualties to try and force a conclusion to the conflict. Of course, the nightmare scenario for the US is a difficult fight, a battle that they probably win, but ultimately it has no strategic gain. And then people would really start to question, what was this all for?
The 82nd Airborne Division is a formidable force, known as the tip of the spear. If they're used in Iran, they could possibly be dropped at night. But waiting for them on the ground would be anti-personnel mines and possibly swarms of drones. Meanwhile, Iran is hurting badly. Not just the government or the Revolutionary Guards, but ordinary residents. These clips from inside Iran, given to our colleagues at BBC Persian, show the frustration with both sides.
Neither America or the government is backing down, nor do these people have anything to lose. Iran doesn't matter to them at all.
My sister said today, enough is enough, for God's sake. Declare a ceasefire. People don't say anymore that they wish the government would go away. They say they just want it all to end. Just end it.
Little sign of that today, though. This was an unexploded Iranian ballistic missile that landed in southern Israel. This war has already wreaked so much damage in this region, and yet it could still escalate further. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Meanwhile, the Ministry of Defence has said RAF regiment gunners operating in a high-threat area have successfully downed multiple Iranian drones. In Lebanon, the Israeli military said it was targeting Hezbollah's infrastructure in Beirut's southern suburbs. Iran has continued to fire missiles and drones at targets in the Gulf states. Kuwait says a strike on a power station and water desalination plant killed an Indian worker. Turkey's defence ministry has announced that a ballistic missile fired from Iran was intercepted by NATO forces deployed in the eastern Mediterranean. Let's go to Washington now. Our State Department correspondent Tom Bateman is there. So now into the 5th week of this war, and it's still anyone's guess what the president might do next.
Well, Sophie, President Trump is talking about talking, a lot of focus on the negotiations, and he said today that his officials are in direct contact with parts of the regime in Tehran. Now, the Iranians deny that, and regional officials that we've been in touch with say that there has only been so far an initial exchange of proposals, and they are maximalist positions. That is why I think at the same time you're seeing Donald Trump ramp up the pressure, briefings from administration officials about the readiness of troops. We now have 3,500 US Marines and sailors in the region. The 82nd Airborne Division, as you were hearing from Frank there, paratroopers also being deployed. They're talking about the potential for ground operations. And at the same time, that extraordinary threat by President Trump to blow up oil wells, energy infrastructure, that one former US government lawyer said today would amounts to the threat of a war crime. The White House, I think, is now in a position where Mr. Trump has to decide either to escalate or to cut his losses. And the fact remains here that it is now a war aim for him to open a strait that was open when he started this war.
Tom Bateman, thank you.